Greetings everyone, welcome to my second episode of Astrophotography Japan. I'm JP Astro Guy, my name is Paul. It's already 3:45 in the morning. You can see twilight is already starting to come up here in Yokohama in Japan. And tonight I've been out here since about midnight, and my target for this evening has been the Bubble Nebula. I've never photographed this one up close before. I'm using my SVBony SV503 80 ED telescope. This has FPL 51 glass. It's a doublet design. When you use it together with its 0.8x reducer flattener from SVBony, you get about 448 millimeters of focal length. Now, that gives me some pretty good magnification with this ASI 533 MC Pro camera because it's got a fairly small 1-inch sensor. So I've been using this a lot during Galaxy season and have been very pleased with the performance of this scope and this combination. Since at this point I mentioned Galaxy season, I thought it would be good to very briefly show you a few photos from the previous months. All of these galaxies were photographed with the equipment I just described at either 448 millimeters or 560 millimeters focal length. Each photo is zoomed and cropped to show you, up close, the detail of each galaxy target. As I mentioned, I am quite pleased with the images, given that they are mostly small targets and located millions of light years distant. I've also got a William Optics guide scope and a 120mm ASI camera for guiding, and I'm using the Optilong L Extreme filter actually to really pull out the color of this beautiful Bubble Nebula. All of this is sitting on my AZ GTI mount. Now, you know, this is kind of a beginner mount. That's the only mount that I've had. I've only been doing this for about a year now, but I've been really happy with the performance of this mount. In fact, right now it shows guiding at 0.9 arc minutes. It's been guiding right around 1 all night, which is really outstanding, considering the weight of this is probably at or near the capacity of 5 kilograms easily. I've even put the ASI Air Pro down here on the leg to try to minimize the weight. And I love this ASI Air Pro. Right now I'm doing a live stack on the Bubble Nebula, and it's looking really nice actually. So anyways, I'm looking forward to sharing these results with you at the end of the video. Thank you again for joining me tonight for another episode of Astrophotography Japan. The Bubble Nebula is a visually interesting target found in the constellation Cassiopeia. At magnitude 11, it is not exactly bright, but easily captured even in my Bortle Class 7 skies. Its distance is about 11,000 light-years away and appears only about 15 arc-minutes in size across its longest axis. The strikingly apparent bubble structure is about 10 light-years in diameter and formed by strong stellar winds that are emitted by a hot young central star. Interestingly, that star does not seem to be actually central to the bubble structure, but rather off a little to one side. The Bubble Nebula can be observed within the plane of the Milky Way. At my latitude here in Japan, and for most of the northern hemisphere, the Bubble Nebula does not rise or set. It is located close to the celestial North Pole and hence rotates around Polaris from our terrestrial viewpoint. I photographed it from 1:08 a.m. to 3:50 a.m., where it started at just over 30 degrees and rose to about 50 degrees altitude in the sky, as simulated here. This faster SkySafari simulation shows the overall rotation of the sky and the nebula in its celestial location. So it is above us throughout the year, but best observed in the summer months when it is high in the sky at night. In the images that I took of the Bubble Nebula, I framed it such that I could also capture the nearby M52 open star cluster as well. This has a visual magnitude of 7.2 and is located about half the distance to the Bubble Nebula, so somewhere around 5,000 light-years. It has a diameter of about 15 light years and an apparent size of 15 arc minutes in the sky. I think its inclusion in the photograph provides a nice contrast of two different types of interesting deep sky objects. So one of the challenges of doing astrophotography here in Japan is transportation. I don't own a car. I live in a highly metropolitan area, have a nice home, but never really needed an automobile. So I use a lot of the local parks around here for doing my astrophotography. This is one very close to my house. But to get here, I use my bicycle, and if you notice over here, I've got like a little trailer on the back of the bike. I bring with me 25 to 30 kilograms worth of equipment every time. Right now my telescope is on the back side of this windscreen here doing some imaging of the Bubble Nebula, and I brought my other telescope so I can do some visual astronomy. Well, here's my transportation. It's not elegant, but it gets the job done. You can drive right into the park, right up to your viewing spot. So it's quite convenient. You do what you gotta do. Now, before proceeding, it is important to understand the specifications of the equipment because that obviously places limits on what you can actually achieve in deep sky photography. As mentioned previously, my SVBony 80 ED telescope with reducer flattener was at 448 millimeters focal length. With the ASI 533 MC Pro camera, I am able to capture 1.45 degrees of sky. Compared to a full frame, the small sensor of this camera has a crop factor rating of about 2.7, making the apparent or practical focal length equivalent to about 1,200 millimeters. This camera has a pixel size of 3.76 micron, so that means 1.73 arc seconds per pixel. That night, my guiding was excellent, generally at about 1 arc second or less, so the photographs should be close to theoretical maximum resolution. But of course, one of the most influential factors on imaging resolution is the quality of the sky, or commonly called seeing in astrophotography. At least I know that the instrumentation was all performing optimally. There is nothing that I can do about the sky. Also, I use the Optolong L-Extreme dual narrowband filter for capturing red hydrogen alpha and blue-green oxygen 3 wavelengths. The filter blocks out 95% of all other light, providing great contrast and reduced background from light pollution. I am going to quickly explain now how I process my data, using 6 different software to get the final image. All of these software programs are freeware, available online except for one, and shown on here on this slide is a quick peek at my final image of the Bubble Nebula. But let me tell you how I get there from the 76 frames and the 124 minutes of raw data. Firstly, I take a quick look at all 76 frames each by each. I have found that the easiest way to do this is with ASI Studio, using their FITS viewer screen. ASI Studio is a freeware available from ZWO. FITS stands for Flexible Image Transport System, and is the format of the photos when they come out of my astrophotography dedicated camera from ZWO. They are similar to raw images that one gets from DSLR cameras, I think. A single FITS photo from my 9 megapixel camera is 18.1 megabytes in size. The FITS viewer screen is shown here, and the green arrow points to the first image taken of the Bubble Nebula. In one single frame, a little bit of the nebula is visible, but that's not important at this stage. But mostly, one is looking for artifacts, trailing stars, airplane streaks, bright satellite trails, clouds, and stuff like that. By using the down arrow on the keyboard in this software, it is easy to rapidly scan each image for artifacts and then delete those that you do not want to include in your final stacked image. I then take those remaining good images, let's call them light frames, it is a common term, and use Deep Sky Stacker to combine all of them into one final composite image. DSS is also freeware and tends to be one of the easiest to use and most forgiving stacking software, in my opinion. After loading all the light frames, DSS will first register the photos and rank them. With the group of Bubble Nebula images I loaded, I decided to uncheck the bottom 10 ranked images because they were of inferior quality. These are shown in the highlighted red box. But why 10? Well, that decision is somewhat arbitrary and depends mostly on the quality scores. This left me with 62 good light frames for stacking. Also note in the upper dialog box that the software identified 52 stars consistent in all the light frames. DSS will use these stars for the image alignment and stacking. This is a low number of stars, but it is pretty typical when you use a narrowband filter during imaging. The filter blocks so much light that only the brightest stars are visible to the software. This slide shows the screen after stacking was completed, which took about 5 or 10 minutes. I always get a 32-bit TIFF file as the final output file, so I think that is the default. However, I need to have a 16-bit file for later steps. So at this point, I instruct the software to output an additional 16-bit file. The green arrow points to the command line that opens the box shown, and you can then select a 16-bit output file here as illustrated with the green circle. Now we have only one file from the 62 previous images. It's a 16-bit TIFF file that is usually about 55 megabytes in size. The next step is to take the 16-bit TIFF file and load it into a professional photo editing software. For this purpose, I use GIMP 2.10 software on my iMac. To my knowledge, this is the most powerful photo editing freeware available on the web today. Its controls resemble Photoshop and are quite complex and intimidating if you never used it before. I learned a lot from watching astrophotography YouTube masters like Nico Carver, for example, but probably half of my knowledge comes from just experimentation with the software. At this point, we only want to do two things and two things only to this image, and that is to stretch and balance the RGB color using the levels function in GIMP, and most importantly, to stretch only the midtones range of colors to achieve an image similar to that I have shown here. The midtones bar is shown with the green arrow. It should be stretched just enough to bring up the color details, but not too bright or oversaturated, just barely enough to be visible. Then it should be exported as another TIFF file format, and that will automatically be saved as a 16-bit image. The main reason I keep stressing 16-bit is because of this next step. Since we are working with a nebula image, the best way to process is to separate out the stars to enhance and balance the nebula image independently. I do this with another freeware called StarNet 2.0. This software is super simple to use and quite effective. It absolutely requires a 16-bit image to work, however. At the bottom left, you see here the control interface. There's nothing to it. To the right, the image above that is labeled before is my Bubble Nebula image that I just stretched and balanced in GIMP as described on the previous slide. That is the input file. I changed the name of the output file to be something.starless and pressed run. That's it. After 5 or 10 minutes, the output file is written, and you can see the Bubble Nebula image on the right side here labeled after. Notice that all the pinpoint white stars are now gone, but for the very brightest stars, there is sometimes some residual artifacts that can be removed later, if desired. Now we have a starless image and it can be processed. I do this again in GIMP. You can see at the top menu bar there are two little black boxes that represent files opened in this GIMP software. One of them was the original 16-bit image file that included the stars, and the other is the starless 16-bit image. I process each independently. The starless one is optimized for making a beautiful bright nebula, and the original one is optimized for only star brightness and high contrast. Afterwards, I drag and drop the nebula image into the starry image and recombine them. I can then adjust them some more if needed as a composite image until I'm satisfied. Now, let me say that this is one way to do the separation, processing, and recombining of images. It is the way that I simply figured out by myself on GIMP. I suspect there are other ways and probably better ways to do this, but I have not learned them yet, and this works for me. I am a rank amateur in photo processing and mostly self-taught. There, that's my disclaimer. Okay, finally, I export this combined file as a PNG image file. The next software I use is called Topaz Denoise AI. Only recently did I discover this amazing software. The $80 single payment software ownership price tag is well worth it. I realized that very quickly after playing around with their trial software download. I use this as a standalone software, but you can purchase apps to integrate it into Photoshop or other editing software. I'm not sure about GIMP. Anyways, Topaz Denoise has 4 different denoise algorithms. You can display a screen as shown here where all 4 algorithms are applied, and you can then adjust settings and pick the best one for your specific image. What makes an image more suited for one particular algorithm or another, I have no idea, but oftentimes the best choice is visually obvious because they are all subtly different. This software usually takes less than 1 minute to apply the changes, so it is very fast. The user interface is excellent and smartly designed. When you selected the right denoise software to use, you simply export and it saves the file to the same format. In my case, that is the PNG image format. Here is an example of the Bubble Nebula before image on the top and the after denoising image on the bottom. Notice the top image looks reasonably good. Thank you very much. But it has a pixelated appearance and some background noise, mostly red from the color stretching that we did on GIMP. The denoised image on the bottom is smooth, shows better contrast, and is clearly higher quality overall. The stars are even a little bit brighter and more plentiful, but this is because I chose the low light option algorithm. The other algorithms do not adjust star brightness, by the way. So, are we done? Well, maybe. But to be honest, I usually take this denoised exported image and pull it into iPhoto on my iMac. Here I often make some small last-minute subtle changes to brightness or contrast or darkness or shadows or highlights, and then I crop it. To save it, I export it as a JPEG file, which is usually anywhere from 0.5 to 4 megabytes. This one turned out to be only 0.44 megabytes. That is my final photo. And here is a close-up view to show you the detail, the color, and the overall beauty of the Bubble Nebula and the M52 Star cluster. I had to work a little bit in post-processing to pull out the bluish color present within the bubble core area, but it was worth the effort. This is an emission nebula, so frankly I'm not even certain if the blue is actually oxygen-3 emission or a bit of blue reflection nebulosity from the bright star within. If anybody knows, please leave a note in the comments. So, let me make a few closing remarks. Firstly, the comments and opinions expressed in this video are exclusively mine and not influenced or sponsored by any commercial partner in any way. I personally bought and own all the equipment. I make these YouTube episodes to share with you my experience and adventures and enthusiasm pursuing astrophotography. I only have about 1 year experience exploring this hobby, so I make no claims of being an expert. I suspect my methods, especially in image post-processing, may be a bit unorthodox or even strange, but it works for me. This hobby is scientific and technical, but also heavily art and adventure. And that's what I love about it. There is room for individual creativity and exploration. Now, admittedly, today this episode of Astrophotography Japan was not exactly much on the adventure side. It was just the local park and showing you my use of software for image processing. But hang in there. Other travel-like adventure videos are planned. And I have some audio-visual equipment upgrades on order to improve the quality as well. I ask you bear with me a little longer. Regardless, I hope you enjoyed the video and got something out of it. Please consider leaving a thumbs up, and of course, I would love to hear any comments or suggestions as well. So, until next time, here's wishing you clear skies. My name is Paul Cheesegel, and I am an astrophotographer.